It's recommended.
Oops.
Grab the bucket.
Welcome to the show. We have a great show today. It's going to be a lot of fun. Obviously a little bit different from the usual blacksmithing or knife making type of project. Today we're going to be making... Now, as much as I hate to interrupt, and I really hate to interrupt myself, I am going to jump in here and explain a couple of things. So first of all, I made this video a long time ago, and it was something that I had planned to share at that time because as a DIYer and as a maker, I have a wide range of interests, and I noticed that there were a lot of videos on YouTube on how to make a sort of pipe gun. I don't personally agree with that. I think there's a lot of danger involved. There's a lot of knowledge you need to have to properly engineer an actual firearm. And especially because of the very high chamber pressures, you really have to know what you're getting yourself into and have some engineering background before you try to construct something that is potentially that dangerous. Now the other thing is, around the same time I was making this video, there was a lot of controversy on YouTube changing some of the community guidelines, and I wanted to be respectful of that. And although this is a video about another way to launch signal flares, not about making a gun, the fact is that it very much resembles some of the other designs that are out there. So it might very well have ended there, except recently the idea of homemade guns is back in the news because of this recent court case about 3D printed guns and putting out plans and so on. And I don't have a 3D printer, but I would like to make the point that historically, as long as there have been projectile weapons, there have been people making their own. And if you want to look at just guns, gunpowder has been around for about 1,000 years. And during that time, there have been thousands upon thousands of homemade designs. And some might argue that technology like the 3D printer makes it easier. Well, you can argue that having technology like a pipe cutter makes it easier, or having a CNC machine. All those things are probably true. But the point is, just about anybody with basic knowledge and access to a hardware store can put something together in a very short period of time that could be regarded as a gun and could be used as such. Again, that is not what I'm building here. I'm building a signal flare launcher. These are like those boat flares. They work in a little bit different way than a firearm, but they do have a primer at the back that ignites the fuel in the first place. And as you'll see, it's actually quite easy to assemble from 2 lengths of pipe and just a couple of other pieces you can pick up at the hardware store. Just about anybody on the planet could put something like this together. So with that, we'll jump back into the video. And mostly I'll let the video run so you can kind of see what I did. I will kind of gloss over the actual assembly and production part of this. I really don't want to run afoul of community guidelines. And also because there are so many people out there who will try something like this, not understand the dangers, and could wind up hurting themselves. Now the hardware store sold these pipes in 2-foot lengths, so I trimmed down both pieces somewhat, but I made sure to keep the overall length at over 26 inches, just in case this is somehow construed as a firearm and it has a smooth bore. It has to have a barrel length of at least 18 inches and an overall length of 26 inches. At least to my knowledge, that applies in the area where I live. For the 3/4 inch pipe to fit properly inside the 1 inch, I had to just barely take down a little bit of the kind of a coating that they put on these pipes. Mainly I just had to get through that and then sand it just a little bit further down. Now at this point, the flare launcher was basically done, but I really couldn't resist adding a couple of embellishments to it, and there really is a practical purpose for these features. For one thing, that forward handle there, that was necessary to keep my hand out of the way of the pipe in case there was some kind of a misfire or a structural failure of some kind, and maybe some pieces come flying out of the end of that or something. I definitely don't want my hand in the way of that. And then at the back, I used, this is actually another plumbing fitting. It's like a rubber connector that adapts one size of pipe to another. In this case, I'm basically just using it as a somewhat shock-absorbing grip to give me something to hold on to or to brace against my shoulder or whatever. Again, these pieces aren't maybe absolutely necessary, but I felt like they added a little bit of, maybe a little extra measure of safety and a little functionality. Now, you may be wondering, if you read the title of this video, why I regard this as a failed flare launcher. I think it might be better to call it a partial success, because yes, this device will launch a flare. But along the way, I discovered some pretty serious design flaws. If you ever did want to build one of these yourself, you probably don't want to follow my example. There are some changes I would make if I did this again. If there isn't a proper fit, like a really snug proper fit between the flare itself and the 3/4 inch pipe, it would be very easy for that flare to drop out the back. You may not realize that the flare has fallen out the back of the barrel. So as you're driving that 3/4 inch pipe down, you can get it wedged in such a way that the primer actually does make contact with the firing pin, but the flare is not seated in the barrel. Now at that point, I think you can use your imagination and see how horribly bad that could go. I don't know, I'd like to think that the damage would be minimal, but when you're dealing with something as potentially powerful as one of these flares, or God forbid you're dumb enough to put a 12 gauge shotgun shell in there, it could just end in real disaster. Again, I'm going to interrupt for a minute. I want to call attention to a modification I made that prevents a shot shell from actually being loaded in. I noticed that the way the flares were designed and the way the original flare launcher was designed, there is a feature built into the barrel that allows a signal flare to be chambered, but would not allow a comparable shot shell to be placed in the chamber. So I took a design cue from that and inserted a metal ring that reduces the diameter of the chamber portion of the pipe, so it prevents a shot shell from being seated in the chamber. Still doesn't render this an absolutely safe device, but at least it prevents you from accidentally loading something besides a signal flare into the launcher. Another consideration, I'd really like to fine-tune the length of the firing pin on this to make sure that that pin doesn't actually over-penetrate and wind up breaching the back of the flare. I just kind of don't like that idea, especially when I'm not real clear on how much chamber pressure is building up in here and what all might affect that. And then finally, when I started this project, I really had no idea how energetic these things are, but they will actually go several hundred feet straight up into the air. So when they come out of the barrel of this launcher, and if it goes off in some unknown direction, it will start a fire on you. The actual nighttime clip that I showed at the beginning of this, that was in a place where there had been recent snow melt, and so pretty much everything around there was pretty wet. It looks kind of spectacular, but it didn't actually start a fire there. But if it had, we had water to put it out with. But from that experience and another one I had where I actually did start a fire, and I'll show that clip at the end here, and had to put that out with a water bucket, I just haven't found a good way to test this thing. But really, you know, a flare is meant to be shot straight up into the air. The problem with that is that wherever you are testing this thing, that can be seen for many, many miles in every direction. So unless you want to explain to the police or the fire department why you were shooting off distress flares when you were not in distress, yeah, I would recommend against shooting these up into the air. Nevertheless, having said all of that, I do want to say this was actually a really, really fun project. It's something that I've kind of been wanting to do for probably a couple of years now. I looked into the legalities of it. In my area, it's not a problem. Obviously, if you are even thinking about doing anything like this, check to make sure you are not going to be violating the law wherever you live, and also do a lot more research, because when it comes to a project like this, there's a lot that could go wrong. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the show. I will roll in one last little bit of test footage here at the end. I'll warn you ahead of time, this is probably the dumbest thing I've done in front of a camera, maybe in my life. So enjoy my stupidity. And with that, I'll say have a wonderful day, and we'll see you in the next video.